Hello and welcome to this tutorial where I'll be talking about how to create REST API with Express. So for the project, we're going to actually handle a CRUD functions, which is basically a create a user, read, update, and delete. And we're also going to be talking about Express middleware and Express router. What the middleware does is basically execute any code within the function, make changes to the request and response object and request response cycle, and call the next middleware within the stack. And for the endpoints, we're gonna handle two basic endpoints. One is /users, and when we call that endpoint, it basically going to get all the users that we are storing, and also we'll be able to add a user to the storage. And the second route is specific to the user ID, so we can actually get the user with a specific ID or update it or delete it. And for the dependencies, as I talked about, we're going to be using Node and Express, and we also going to implement nodemon, which is a npm package that basically watches your source code and automatically restarts your server without you doing any manual work. And to test our endpoint, we're going to use Postman. And you can follow along with this tutorial either by cloning the GitHub repo or doing an npm install with Express and nodemon. So let's go ahead and take a look at the demo. So as you can see, I have a bare minimum Express application for the packages. As I said, I only have Express and nodemon installed. And also I've modified the start script, which will automatically start the nodemon server so we can watch for the changes within our source code. And for the app, let's go ahead and create actual Express server. To do that, first we have to import Express. Require Express. Let's comment and say import. And the next part is I'm going to declare some objects, declarations. Let's create an instance of our Express server, and we're going to define the port that we'll be using. In this case, port 8080. Also, we're going to define some global middleware. So for global middleware, we're going to use express.json, which enables us to actually read our request.body. Since we're going to be working with JSON objects, it enables us to read the incoming data and parse it. Okay. So for the routes, let's just declare a simple route to the home, to the slash, and this is where the middleware is actually implemented. So we have an access to request and response objects, and in this case we're just going to respond with a JSON containing a message saying hello from Express server. All right, and to actually run our server, we have to do app.listen and specify the port, and specify a callback as well. And within the callback, we're going to actually call a console log with backticks saying server is running on port, and I'm going to insert the port variable. Okay. So this is how we basically create a simple Express server. So let's go ahead and run our server with npm start. As you can see, nodemon is watching for any changes within our application, and we're getting a confirmation saying that the server is running on port 8080. So to test it out, let's go ahead and open up a Postman. So we're going to do a GET request to http://localhost 8080. And as you can see, we're getting the message saying hello from Express server, which confirms that our server is running. All right. So to actually make the REST API, we're going to open up a new folder called routes. It's generally a good idea to separate your routes in case it becomes bigger, or if you have to handle like private or public routes, it's easier to make different modules for them. So for our hypothetical application, we'll have a list of users that we will basically manipulating using REST API. Okay. So for this one, we have to import Express as well. Require Express, and we're going to use Express router. Router equals express.router. And since I'm not applying any, I'm not using any database, I actually created a variable that will hold our data. So this is an array of objects, and each object have an ID, name, and age, and email properties. All right, and also let's not forget to export our router and use it within our app.js. So module.exports router. So that's how we make it available for our app.js to use the users JS. So to do that, let's go under routes and define our router. So we're going to do app.use, specify the path, which is users, and we're going to use our defined router, /routes users. Okay. All right, so first we're going to handle sort of general API calls to the /users, specifically a get and post request. To do that, we're going to have to use router.route, and it's going to be /, which is /users in this case. And we're going to do a get. We're going to handle a get request, get our request and response objects. And all the get request does is basically returns all of the users that we have within our data variable. So in this case, we're going to do res.json. We're going to return a JSON object with all of our users in case data. To test it out, let's go ahead and open up a Postman and go to /users and send a get request. And as you can see, our API is returning all of the users that we have available. All right. So in this part, we're going to handle a post request in case that we want to post a new user to our data array. I'm going to use the same syntax. First, before we post it, we actually have to get the user from the request.body. So we're going to do const user equals request.body. And also we have to handle the sequence of the ID, since when we post a data, we don't really know which sequence of ID comes next. Well, we are going to create a simple function that would basically give us a next sequence of ID. So in this case, get next ID. And all it does is it returns new ID. In this case, we're going to look at the data. We're going to get the last object within our array. And we're going to access its ID property and add 1 to it. So that's how we get a new ID. So in this case, the next ID will be 3, 4, 5, and so on. So to add the ID to our user object, we're going to do user.id, and we're going to call get next ID. So it will create a new key value pair for the user object, saying ID in the new sequence of ID. Okay, and to push our data to our array, we're going to do data.push and add our user. And to end the request response lifecycle, we're going to do res.json. So we have the response. We have to send the response to the post request, and we will just send all of our data so the user can see which one was added. To test it out, let's go to Postman, users, change the verb to post, and let's go to body. We're going to do raw, and the format that we're going to use is JSON. So in this case, let's create a name. Let's do Bob Doe, just random names. Age 30, and email. You can do bob@gmail.com. Okay, so let's go ahead and send the request, and we'll get a response with the 200. And as you can see, we've added our new user to our array. And as you can see, ID is automatically being incremented and added to the object before it's being pushed into the array. Okay. And the next route that we're going to handle is specific to a user ID. So we're going to do router.route, and it's going to be /ID. And the way that we access ID is using parameters, and I'm going to show you how. So the first one, we're going to handle a get request. So if we want to get a specific user from our small database, what we can do is first get this ID from parameter. The way we do that is const ID equals parse integer, since we need the ID as an integer, and when it is passed, it is actually passed as a string. So that's what we're parsing it. I'm going to do request.params.id. Okay, and we're gonna create a temporary variable to hold our user before we return it. And let's go ahead and search within our data array that specific user. So we're going to do data.map. We're going to look at each element and check if the element ID is equal to the ID that we were looking for. And if the user matches, we're just going to assign that element to the user. All right. And to end the response request lifecycle, we're going to return the user. To do that, I'm going to use a short syntax for if and else statement. So we're going to say user. If user exists, res.json, return that user. If the user doesn't exist, res.status 404, since we couldn't find the user. And we're gonna return a JSON with a message saying user not found. Okay, so let's go ahead and test the endpoint. We're gonna do post. We don't need the body. We're gonna use the params for it. So let's say if we're looking for ID 3, so it should only return ID 3. And as you can see, we're only getting that user with ID 3. If we do 2, we're only gonna get that user with ID 2. And if we can't find that user, let's say if it's 7, which we don't have, it's going to say message user not found with a status code 404. Okay. And in the next part, we are going to implement update, so if we want to update a specific user's information, we're going to use put, implement our middleware. So for the put, we're going to do the same thing, which is getting the user's ID. So we have to know which user we have to change or update. And since we are implementing array with objects and we have key value pairs, what I'm going to do is actually look for which keys are being updated within that user and only update those. So to do that, we have to actually get the actual keys. So let keys equal. So we're going to use object.keys. And we're going to parse the request.body. So that will give us an array of keys that is being requested to be updated. And next, we're going to do another map and look through each element, see if the element ID matches, and if it does, we're gonna get that key and we're gonna assign the value that we get from request.body with that specific key. Okay, and at the end we're gonna do res.json and response with our data, so we can see which values are being updated. So let's go ahead and test our API. So in this case, let's first get all of our users. So as you can see, this is how the users currently look like. And let's say if we want to update the user with ID 2. So we're going to do /2, change our verb to put, and we're going to actually pass the JSON object and specify which properties that we want to update. In this case, let's say we want to update email. So in this case, it's mike@gmail.com, and we're going to update it to mike12@gmail.com. All right, let's go ahead and send it. I'm getting an error. Oh, actually we have to do another map, sorry. So we have to do keys.map to get each key as well. Get the key and we're gonna update it within that key. So now it should work. Let's go ahead and do that. Yep, here we go. So we're getting a status to 200, and as you can see, Mike Doe email address is turned to Mike12 instead of Mike. All right, so let's go back and lastly implement our delete function. So we're going to .delete and get the request and response objects. And to delete, we are going to pretty much do the same thing. We need to get the ID of that object. We're going to do data.map, and that map function returns an element, and we can have access to that index as well. So we're going to use the index to delete that object from our array. And we're going to check if the element's ID matches. So if it does, we're going to do data.splice, and we're going to specify the index and number of elements that we want to delete at that index, which is 1. Okay, and we have to close the lifecycle by sending res.json with the data. Let's go ahead and save. So just to test it out, we're doing get. So these are all of the objects available right now. And if we want to delete a specific user, we have to pass the ID and change the verb to delete. And as you can see, the user with ID 1 has been deleted. So if we do 3, it's going to delete that one as well. So that's how you implement a REST API using Express. If you have any questions, please let me know, and hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Thank you.